An Extra Knife at Dinner, a Gabrielle Ibrahim mystery, an audio series by Patricia Asedegbega, Episode 7. Is this seat taken? The look on Chooks' face when he saw her was priceless. Not waiting for a reply, Gabrielle sat next to the man, who was evidently not thrilled by her presence.
"How is this a good idea?" he asked. "I mean, you showing up here, to a place where someone supposedly gave Antonia the contact of a person who could help get rid of you. Someone we don't know, who might still be interested in finishing the job."
Chooks shook his head, looking exasperated. "Well, look at it this way. I'm helping you. The girl sitting by the bar was walking straight for your table when I sat down, and the one over there that keeps looking at you, she has the same intention, so you're welcome." Gabrielle smiled as she signalled to the waiter, who came over to the table and took her order. "Any luck?" "I'm guessing not. One can't just go around asking for the kind of information we need. I guess we'll have to stick around for a while," Gabrielle said, smiling sweetly at Chooks, who was clearly still miffed at her presence in the club.
"Yes, something tells me that those kinds of business deals are conducted when the place is almost closing and people are quite wasted, so they notice and remember less." "So, how was your day? Anything new to report?" Chooks asked, seemingly accepting the inevitable.
"Well, from what an eyewitness said, George's date put her bag on the seat next to Sandra's when she arrived," Gabrielle said. "I remember she removed it when I made to sit down, so I was closeted between them, so to speak. Nobody seems to know much about her. I'm thinking that she might be the person we're looking for. Look, I was given a glass of champagne when I walked in and I put it down next to Sandra's, as I was there solely because of her. At a certain point I reached for it, and George's date was doing exactly the same thing, except it was my glass. She smiled and apologised, saying that she made a mistake, and then went for hers. I believe she put something in it. Then, when we got up for the toast, my glass was gone, and that was when I looked around for the waitress. I remember some of us were seated and others had got up. I took a glass and leaned forward. That was the exact moment that I felt the sharp pain. I tell you, that was when I was stabbed." "Who was next to me?" "I think someone saw her put something in my drink. Or maybe she thought I saw. Not wanting to risk things, she got rid of it and went for plan B. I've gone over the events, and this makes perfect sense."
"Maybe. So we need to find her, and you need to speak to George. Don't close any other doors, though," Chooks said, and took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room.
"That's exactly why I'm here. You have information on one or two of the guests, and seeing that you aren't prone to speaking voluntarily." The man stopped looking around, his eyes suddenly on her. Gabrielle smiled, and he chuckled and shook his head. "Joseph, you know more about me at the moment than basically anyone," she told him. "Your ex was at that party. I don't know if she was an invited guest or not, but I need to know the kind of person she is and how far she's willing to go, because my friend Sandra is dating the man she's set her sights on and vowed to marry. My friend can fight her own battles, and I don't need the extra worry, but I can't ignore what I know because I thought everything had ended months ago. Yet once again, my world is filled with uncertainty, and I'm finding it difficult to discern what's real and what isn't at the moment." Gabrielle observed the man, hoping he would decide to speak.
"Calling me Joseph makes me feel like I'm being interrogated by my mother, something I'm very sure influenced your choice of words," he said. "Look, like you, I have a very complicated family history. My father is one of your kind, very wealthy. But we had issues that I'm not going to go into now. Anyway, I met Rachel when we were both in our early teens, before I left the country. We dated briefly then, but lost touch. About 3 years ago, we reconnected again. A group chat was created of our old gang of friends from back then, and I was added. I'd been quite out of touch with everyone from my former world, but it was nice to catch up. She was part of that group chat, and we somehow commenced a long-distance relationship. I always meant to return back to Nigeria and establish myself here. Some time before, while still in the US, I met Adrian Azuka. He talked about his plans to set up his hospital in Benin City, and I told him that I wanted to do something similar. Sometime later, he contacted me and asked if I wanted to work with him. I did have some savings, but not enough to embark on such a massive project. Adrian liked my resume and the ideas I had, so he offered that we start off together in Benin, and then I'd lead the one here in Lagos, owning a percentage as a partner. It was what I was waiting for. I'm passionate about medicine and research, and so Rachel and I made plans for my return once everything would be in motion.
Gabrielle was listening attentively. From his countenance, it was difficult to read his emotions. There were questions that she wished she could ask, but she sensed that for Chooks, all he had said already had taken him out of his comfort zone. So for about a year it was working non-stop. I had no idea just how much money and influence Adrian had until I got back. But I grew to be esteemed by him, because what I did not own, I made up for with my effort and dedication. We got referrals, not just from all over the country. People came from different African countries. Soon, the Lagos branch became a necessity, and I moved back here to establish it. In the meantime, the relationship with Rachel followed the natural course. I proposed, my people went to see her people, and she started preparing the wedding.
You make it sound so romantic, Gabrielle teased, and after giving her a look, Chooks shook his head and let out a chuckle. Anyway, I was really busy, so basically I just signed checks and paid for things. They made all the arrangements, especially as my mother gave up early on the planning, as her suggestions weren't being taken into consideration. I should have taken that as a warning sign. So about 2 weeks before the wedding, we broke up.
Gabrielle could not help gaping in shock at how the man had ended the tale so abruptly. With a hand gesture, she indicated that he was to elaborate. It was difficult to get things out of her, but Chooks was even more hermetic.
A guy came to see me, he began. He claimed to have been dating her at the same time as me, and that he found out she was engaged because she posted photographs of her hen night on social media. He came with proof and showed me text messages, photographs of trips they'd taken together, etc. Anyway, there was no doubt that they'd been in a relationship. I confronted her and she denied it. I didn't have the time to argue, so I told her that I wouldn't be going ahead with the wedding. And the tone changed from her not knowing him to him misinterpreting their friendship. When I refused to budge, she said it had been a mistake, that I was to forgive her, that I'd been working too much, and that it would never happen again. Her mother came to speak to me, friends, family members. I told them that I'd already told my people that the wedding would no longer be held and that they'd better do the same if they didn't want to be embarrassed on the date we'd set, because I was not going to show up at the church.
How do you know that the man wasn't someone simply trying to create havoc in the relationship? Gabrielle asked. Maybe he was in love with her, and he did all that in a bid to stop the wedding.
Oh, you should have seen all the information he had, Chooks replied. He even sent stuff to my phone for when I spoke to her. You'd have zero doubts too. And no, he wasn't a lovesick puppy. He was angry. Very angry, because he'd also proposed to her. And from every indication, it all pointed to a very cold selection process on her part.
What if it hadn't been such a clinical process? What if she made a mistake? Couldn't you have forgiven her? I can't imagine what it must feel like 2 weeks before a wedding and having it cancelled.
See, this is why you women get into bad marriages, Chooks told her. Whilst listening, you kept expecting me to tell you how I fell in love, and basically that she was the centre of my universe. But when these things happen, they're the answers to someone's prayers. In this case, my mother's. I valued trust over everything else. It was gone, and there was no way I could stand at the altar and make my vows. Not a question of forgiveness. I moved on. No bitterness, to be honest, just relief. Now the other guy, he was livid. To answer your other question, Rachel's very calculating. But her mother? That woman's on another level. Her mind should be studied for the good of science. Your friend Sandra? Ugh, I feel for her.
Chooks made a gesture as he took another sip of his drink, and Gabrielle felt a sense of foreboding. He was staring intently at someone in the bar area, and Gabrielle followed his gaze. Perhaps he had noticed someone pertaining to the reason they were there. A young girl was hugging a man. Gabrielle had not seen her come in, but she'd noticed the man earlier on. Chooks got up, a determined look on his face.
That's my sister,
he said, and Gabrielle got up quickly and followed him. Whatever he was about to do, something told her that his sibling would not appreciate it.
Chinwe, what are you doing here? He asked.
On hearing his tone, Gabrielle winced. Nope, she will not like whatever he's about to say or do. Hi, I'm Gabrielle, she began, but was cut off by a shriek.
Gabrielle Ibrahim! Chooks! How? How do you know Gabrielle Ibrahim? And why?
Chinwe asked.
Why haven't you introduced her to me before? Of all the horrible things you've done to me, and there have been many, this is the most unforgivable. Ah, where are my manners? This is Francis, my boyfriend.
Chinwe proudly held on to the arm of the smiling man. Gabrielle had to smile extra hard to make up for Chooks looking like he was making a supreme effort not to punch the boyfriend.
Pleased to meet you, Francis. Chinwe, we were just about to leave. Can we drop you anywhere? The doctor asked.
Oh, I just got here. Can't you stay a while more? I mean, if the ride includes Gabrielle. Babe, I'm sorry, but we'll have to reschedule our date. I have so many questions.
Chinwe gushed excitedly. With one more murderous look from Chooks in Francis's direction, they walked out of the bar to his car. Gabrielle had been dropped off by Donatus and planned to call her trusted cab driver, but Chooks said he would take her home en route to his sister's. Gabrielle hoped they would go back to the nightclub, because aside from worrying about the future of Sandra's relationship, they were nowhere closer to finding the hired killer.
It's not a suggestion. You are not to see that Francis man again, or even message him for that matter. I hope that you understand I'm being serious here.
You can't tell me who to see or who not to see. You aren't my father.
The only one who had basically spoken during the car ride had been Chinwe, though it was more like she had bombarded Gabrielle with questions. Chooks had been dangerously quiet, a state that had lasted until they arrived at the house, and then he had made his feelings about the man his sister was dating abundantly clear. Gabrielle was standing in the living room watching, amused at the fight between the siblings, when a middle-aged woman walked in. She paused for a second, taking the scene in before walking over to Gabrielle.
Hi, I'm Henrietta Ogechi. You must excuse my children. They seem to believe that a screaming match will solve whatever their disagreement is on this occasion. They still haven't learned, after years and years of being related to each other, that scenes like these have never got them anywhere. You are?
She's Gabrielle Ibrahim. Mummy, I showed you her website, Chinwe said. I show it to you every Christmas. I have no idea how Chooks met her, but best advise him not to let this one go. He can't do any better.
She smiled with glee, and Gabrielle knew that her words were still part of the verbal battle she was having with her brother, who shook his head and walked out of the room. The tall woman gestured that Gabrielle was to take a seat, and Chinwe sat right by her side.
Chinwe, instead of fighting Joseph, try using words. You know that he isn't prone to theatrics or exaggerating, nor does he respond well to being screamed at.
The woman cautioned.
But Mummy, he only just met Francis, and they barely exchanged a word. He can't possibly take a dislike to him without a reason. Chooks has never approved of any of my boyfriends, and let's face facts, he never will. He was rude and condescending, barely replying to his greeting, and I really like Francis. I won't allow him to chase this one away like he did Ndabisi. He needs a girlfriend.
That is, if Miss Ibrahim isn't more than a friend. Chinwe looked at Gabrielle hopefully, and she was about to reply when Chooks walked back into the room.
No, she's not, and I wouldn't object to your boyfriends if you picked them better, he said. This Francis was there a while before you arrived. Gabrielle had her back to him, but he was well in my line of vision. He flirted with the bartender, bought a few girls drinks, and I saw him take the phone numbers of at least 2 other girls. I wouldn't want him to be anyone's husband, much less yours. Gabrielle, I've been called back to the clinic. There's an emergency. I'm afraid that I can't go back to the club or drop you at home.
Gabrielle smiled and nodded. It's fine, I have a trusted taxi driver. I call when I need to go out at weekends or after hours. He normally works till quite late, so no worries. Call me tomorrow if you have time so we can go over some things. The man nodded and hurried out of the room.
No, it's late, Henrietta Ogechi said. There's no need for you to go out at this time of the night. You can sleep in Chooks' room and leave tomorrow. And young lady, I won't accept any arguments.
Oh, really? I couldn't impose. I barely know your son. And it feels like I'd be intruding on his privacy. It's fine. I work really late sometimes, and Barry the driver has my complete trust. Gabrielle protested, getting up to make her point clearer.
Joseph doesn't live here anymore, so his room's basically a guest room.
Chinwe, why don't you get our guest something to eat, and then prepare the room for her? Chinwe nodded and did as she was asked. At those words, Gabrielle sat down again. Henrietta reminded her of her mother, always willing to open her home. That thought took her to Antonia. Gabrielle would ask Chooks to at least allow her to speak to her, just to see how Antonia was doing. The woman was saying something, and Gabrielle apologised and asked her to repeat herself. I was being a nosy mother, wondering where you met Joseph and the nature of the friendship. Not trying to scare you away or anything like that, but, well, for whatever reason you're here. Joseph hasn't brought anyone home since... Since Rachel? Gabrielle asked, not uncomfortable with the natural curiosity of the doctor's mother. She herself wanted to know more about the man for a good number of reasons. Some she wasn't sure she cared to analyse quite yet. Yes, not that she came here a lot, Mrs. Ogechi said. I could see that she didn't like visiting. We don't have a lot of comforts. I like keeping things simple. I've lived in this house for so many years, and for some people, like my son, who's tried to no avail to move me, he isn't comfortable that it's on what many consider to be the wrong side of town, and too modest. But these walls were all I had for so long. I don't ever want to forget that, and luxuries don't make me happy or add value to my life. I know how to survive on barely anything. Gabrielle nodded. The little she had seen of their home was tastefully but very simply decorated. The woman seemed lost in thought, her eyes fixed on a spot on the wall. It was an icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Gabrielle smiled. She had always felt drawn to the comfort the larger hands gave. She also had one in her bedroom, and she imagined in difficult times that Mother Mary was holding her hands in the same way. It really is a very welcoming home. Thank you so much for having me, Gabrielle said, and the woman smiled at her. Gabrielle noticed that her son had inherited his penetrating eyes from her. You're welcome. I hope this isn't too forward, but from the way Chinwe gushed about what you do, you might be able to help us. We're having our yearly harvest at church to raise funds. The roof needs some serious work, and I wondered if you'd like to donate something towards our auction. Please feel free to say no if it isn't convenient, or if I'm imposing. Her hostess looked at her hopefully. Of course, do come by the boutique, and you can pick out whatever you feel would be most convenient. Here's my card. I'd like you to call me before you come, so I can be there. Gabrielle handed it to her, and the woman thanked her and asked her some questions about her line of work. About 10 minutes later, her daughter came back into the room and plunged herself onto one of the sofas, looking at the two women with interest. Gabrielle, I see you're not wearing a wedding ring. So this advice goes for you too, Mrs. Ogechi said. Speaking of Rachel again has brought back memories of the time I spent with her and her mother, which was not a lot, but more than enough.
I have 3 children, each with very different personalities. Uju, my youngest, is in uni. She's of a cautious nature. She weighs every option before making a decision. Chooks is not at all easy to read and quite complex, but he is a wonderful and very protective person, if one's able to crack his exterior. Should he decide to be with anyone, and I have serious doubts at the moment, that woman will always feel safe with him. I'm just very grateful that he didn't make a mistake. Chinwe, be happy that your brother looks out for you. I can tell you from my own experience that sometimes people just want to attend a wedding, and I'll encourage you to overlook so many things you should not put up with. Better you cry a little now than to have your eyes never dry up later. Gabrielle, I'm sure in the little time you've spent in Chinwe's company, you've concluded that she's the scatterbrain of the family. She's always falling in love, and for the most superficial reasons, hence her brother's lack of patience with her choices. So, Gabrielle, now is the time to look, observe and study. Take it from a much older woman. Enough of serious and melancholic talk. Let's move over to the dining room. Something tells me that Chinwe prepared the only dish in her repertoire, fried eggs and plantain, and it's best eaten hot. The 3 women laughed and got up. Gabrielle thought that she had much to think about. Everyone seemed to be hiding a secret or nursing some wound. But was she any different?
Uki had sent Gabrielle a very comprehensive report via email, and she'd read it before falling asleep. The next day at the office, a knock at the door produced the young woman. Gabrielle invited her to take a seat. I read what you sent. Very thorough. Wow, is that the exact cutlery set? Uki was laying it out on her desk and nodded and smiled shyly as Gabrielle picked each knife up. I spoke to the event planner that was assigned to the party, she revealed. She was quite frustrated with the event as they live off reviews and their reputation, and the evening was a disaster. So she was really eager to answer my questions and tried to get me to commit, assuring me that the terrible events of the evening had nothing to do with their company. I asked if anything similar had happened before, and she said that it hadn't. Mabel has been working for the company for 5 years. She explained that the waiters and servers were from the catering company that supplied the food. Would you like me to pay them a visit? I got the name, so I can innocently drop by to check out their services. If you don't mind, but first I need you to get the knives to this person at this address. Gabrielle replied. He's expecting them. So please see that they're delivered to him. How come they had the cutlery at the event planners? I would have imagined the catering company supplied them. They normally do, but Mabel said Mrs. Deji wanted a specific set. Uki explained. She bought them exclusively from a catalogue, so I asked to see it. I copied every reference number and went and bought them. These were on every table. I copied the cups and plates as well, so my interest wouldn't look too suspicious. Excellent work, Gabrielle said. The most urgent task now is to send the knives to that address, and then, if you can, visit the catering service and see if you can speak to the servers from that day. Was there anyone new on the job? Ask about the waiter in this photograph. Gabrielle showed her the image she had printed earlier on. He was said to have had a suspicious attitude. Commend the food served, since what I tasted was excellent, and say the cake, which Mrs. Deji never got the chance to cut, looked really good. Find out all you can. It really is important to me. Also, call this number and ask if I can see him this morning, and let me know when he's available. I'll do that immediately, ma'am. Uki left, and Gabrielle sat in silence for a few moments. So much had happened in the last week, and she needed to try to make some sense of everything. So she did what she always did whenever she was faced with a puzzle. She created a new document on her laptop and carefully outlined everything she knew and all the possibilities. She hated that there were so many variables, too many possibilities, and some out of her control. She should not have listened to Sandra and been convinced to go to that party. Then she would not be in the middle of such a complicated situation. Well. To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? George eyed Gabrielle suspiciously. She thought that she would have to make a supreme effort not to show her distaste at being in his company, especially with how he was looking at her. Glad to see you're doing well. You basically got out of the ordeal unscathed and are back to occupying your usual spot at this lounge. Gabrielle raised an eyebrow and smiled, shaking her head. Of course, because as soon as the opportunity presented itself, I made for the door. George replied. The rest of you took your sweet time, as if looking for a reason to sustain an injury, if you hadn't already. Mark almost got himself killed, all thanks to your friend. No, as soon as they left, I told Naomi to follow me and zoomed off. Gabrielle stared at him, appalled by his callousness. You mean you didn't even stick around to see if Mark was okay? George, even for you that's a new low. Look, there was little I could have done for him, George replied nonchalantly. Everyone was around him and Sandra. I heard people speaking on their phones, calling for ambulances, so what use was my being there? I had to get Naomi out of there. She was my responsibility. Every word that came to her mind was not at all appropriate, so she remained silent for a second as George observed her. I take it that Naomi got home safe, she eventually said. I hope you haven't discarded this one yet. Gabrielle hoped Naomi was still in his life. George was known for his very, very brief relationships. I have no idea. She was right behind me, and when I got to my car, she wasn't. There was no way I was going back there into the chaos. Are you serious? You just left? Gabrielle asked in shock. George, you just said that she was your responsibility. She didn't know any of us. If she was right behind you, maybe something happened to her. Have you seen or heard from her since? You're just validating my reasons for not going back, he replied. If something happened to her, her family, that I've never even met, would have held me responsible. Nope, she's a big girl. I told her to stay close, and she didn't. But calm down. I did call her when I got home, and she arrived safe and sound. Not a single scratch on her. Apparently, she escorted someone to a nearby clinic, and she even apologized for not letting me know. So, you see, I did absolutely nothing wrong. I was constantly getting reports on Mark. No need to go see him till he regained consciousness, which I did a few days later. I hate hospitals. I never understood why people spend time sitting next to someone who doesn't even know that they're there. He winked at her as he took a sip from his glass. Are you still seeing her? Gabrielle asked. Who? Naomi, George. Naomi, Gabrielle said in exasperation. Oh, no, I didn't call her back, and neither did she try to reach me. I'm now seeing Fidelia, a nurse I met whilst visiting Mark. As you can see, every good deed has its recompense, was the reply she got. So, to what do I owe this visit? George asked again. Can't be to question me about my personal life. Look, Ngozi already said a few things to me when I called to see how she was doing. Is it because you changed your mind about me? I heard things have gone cold between Alex and you. If that's the case, just say the word and Fidelia will be history. He grinned at her. Oh, let me assure you, George, that will never ever be on the cards. No, I actually wanted to get in touch with Naomi. I didn't get her details at the party, and who better to have them than her date? Gabrielle looked at him hopefully. I can give you her contact, but I don't know where she lives. I met her a few weeks before the party at our club, and we went out a few times, but she always met me somewhere. She indicated an interest in coming with me to the party, so I took her, as I'd already confirmed a +1. What does she do for a living? Gabrielle asked. I think my answer will infuriate you even further, so it's better I don't give it. Look, I'm sending you her number now. The meeting had been a waste of time. George lived in a world in which there was only space for him. Thanks, George. Don't you think what happened was all too convenient? I mean, the hit. Was there anything suspicious that caught your attention that evening? Not really. It was the perfect opportunity. If I was into crime, I would have planned the robbery myself. Your friend's bag alone was worth millions, and then there was the table with those women, always doing their best to outdo each other. The party was a come and rob me plea. To be honest, when I saw Rachel and the way she was looking at Mark and Sandra, I thought there'd be a bloodbath that evening. I knew there was no way that he'd invited her. He avoided her like the plague. But life's full of surprises. The fireworks came from somewhere else. I was also astonished to see Mrs. Okafor there. They must have mended fences. Other than that, nothing out of the ordinary, just a very well-organised party. They made sure our glasses were never empty. George smiled cheekily at that last bit. "Mended fences?" Gabrielle asked. "Yes, I don't have all the particulars, as I tuned out when my mother started giving me the gist. Apparently, the celebrant and Cynthia Okafor had a huge blowout about 3 weeks before the party, and there she was like nothing had happened. You women are funny. 1 minute you're fighting and pulling each other's hair, and the next you're smiling in front of a photo call like everything's perfect. I remember Naomi, and I talked about it. She also heard about the spat. She was even the one that told me at the party about one of them losing her wig in the process. Seeing them all dolled up, it was quite funny to imagine." "Yes, but I guess fights happen between friends from time to time. Nothing of interest there," Gabrielle said. "I have to go, George. Thanks a lot for the contact. By the way, I never asked, what exactly do you do for a living?" "I'm a businessman," was all he said. As Gabrielle walked away, she thought that it was a very general job description that a lot of people used, and left one just as ignorant as before the question was asked. To stay up to date with Patricia Asedegbega's work, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.